So, hello and welcome everyone. Great to see you all this morning to answer the question, or at least attempt to answer the question, social cost benefit, how does it work? We've got three really interesting speakers coming up here, a group from Decisio who've got a social cost benefit analysis tool they've been developing, some insights from Rotterdam as well on how they've been using the tool, and of course from our own project, Transurban EU China. So maybe let me just begin by handing over to Professor Dr. Bernhard Muller, who will introduce the Transurban EU China project, and then we'll launch into the presentation.
Hi, good morning, everyone. I'm very glad that we have such a big audience. I hope everyone is fine. I just would like to send the greetings from the project management. The project on transition towards urban sustainability through socially integrative cities is a EU-financed research and innovation action with 14 partners from Europe and from China. We mainly talk about socially inclusive or socially integrative cities. And what do we understand by that? This is, we had a long discussion in the project and we came to some conclusions concerning what we would like to understand and see coming up as a contribution to sustainable development. So when we talk about socially integrative cities, we talk about socially mixed, cohesive, livable, and vibrant communities. Compactness, functional mix, intra-urban connectivity play an important role. The environmental quality, the quality of public spaces as well, quality of life, they contribute to the well-being of the population, of course. The sense of community is important, the sense of place, the preservation of cultural heritage, investments into neighborhood improvement, and very important, especially in these days, empowerment and participation of the population, as well as social capital are indispensable. Within this project, we have 5 working areas. One is dealing with community building and placemaking in neighborhoods. The next one on bridging, planning and implementation, a gap in eco and smart cities, especially a topic which is very important for Europe, but as well especially for China. Then we deal with land use and land management, expansion and urban renewal approaches, and deal with integrated transition pathways towards sustainable urban planning and governance. And finally, we do all this together with partners, especially Euro cities, with regard to urban living labs in cities. The dissemination and the discussion among the cities is a very important goal of this project. So therefore, I'm very glad that we have this meeting today, and I'm looking forward to very interesting discussions and contributions. My colleague from one of our partner institutions, who is managing as well the work package on integrated transition pathways, he, I think, will talk about the social cost benefit analysis today. And I'm very much looking forward, especially to the contributions from the cities. So all the best, and nice to have you here. All the best and good success for the meeting. Thank you, Anthony.
Great, and let me reiterate the excitement that you pointed out there. So let's launch right into it. And we've got, I think, Lilian Tilburgs from Decisio, who's going to introduce the basic idea of cost-benefit analysis, and especially how they've been working with it over the last few years. So Lilian, are you present? Can you hear me?
Yes, I'm here.
Fantastic.
Yeah. Should I share my screen?
Yes, you go ahead, and if you have trouble, I can put your presentation up.
Okay, let me try. When doing a social cost benefit analysis, we look at the different impacts that human actions can have on society, on others. For example, if you're smoking, it causes an impact on the people around you because it has bad smell and it's bad for their health. But some of these impacts can also even backfire on yourself. For example, when you're in a traffic jam, you can be very annoyed at the people preventing you from driving. But actually you're part of the problem yourself, because you're in a traffic jam yourself, so you're also causing this congestion for the others on the road. So there can be negative consequences, but there can also be positive consequences of these human actions. For example, in times of the corona situation that we have now, getting a vaccine would have a positive impact on the others surrounding you, because you prevent yourself from getting sick, but you also prevent others from getting sick. And all these positive and negative impacts on others can be interpreted as social costs and benefits. And as an economist, I like to analyze these different costs and benefits, and I like to study them and value them in terms of one unit that's comparable. And we do that in monetary terms, so we use euro values. And this is the social cost benefit analysis. It's basically a standard methodology to evaluate different impacts on societies from all kinds of human actions. Then we compare these impacts, so the cost and the benefits, against the investments that is needed to obtain these impacts. So, for example, we use social cost benefit a lot in public works. When building a road, for example, you need investment on building roads or building a cycling lane, and then it has all these different implications. And we value the investment costs for this road or cycling track and see what the implications are and compare these to each other. But how would we value these different impacts in terms of monetary values? Time is a really renewable, non-renewable and scarce resource, and spending it has a value. But the value of time is really connected to the activity that you're doing. So, for example, if you're watching a movie for 2 hours, it's more pleasant than sitting in a chair for the dentist, for example. And when looking at mobility projects, for example, driving, we like to ask people how much they would be willing to pay to get from A to B faster. To have 1 hour less of travel time, how much would they be willing to pay for that? So that's one example. Another example is when people start cycling rather than driving a car, they have an extra benefit, and that's the health effects. People get physical exercise, so they are less sick, and also they are more productive. And this can be valued using different measurements. And for example, we look at the savings of healthcare costs that are prevented by more people cycling. We have prolonged life expectancy. We have improved life quality because people are less sick. And then we have increased work productivity, which can also be valued in monetary terms based on the wages of employees. Then we have a third example. In this example, I like to compare traveling 1 kilometer by car, by bike, or by foot. And traveling 1 kilometer by either of these modes has really different impacts. So it's like I said before, if you're cycling, you have physical activity, so it has an impact on health. But also driving a car, it has impact on safety, on traffic congestion, on the climate change, air pollution, noise pollution, and also on nature. So when we compare all these effects and we measure them in euro values, we can see that well, I have an example here of the city of San Donato in the north of Italy. And in this situation, we calculated that a car costs 20 cents for society based on different impacts that it has, while actually cycling gains society 14 cents per kilometer. And walking even gains society 24 cents per kilometer. This is also mostly due to all the health effects that are related to the active modes of transport. So actually switching from car to bike or from car to walking would gain society 34 to 44 cents per kilometer. And it might not seem like a lot, like 20 cents per kilometer costs when driving a car. It's not really a lot, but if you consider that there's 4,900 billion kilometers traveled by car in the year 2017 in Europe, that's really a lot, because it turns out that there's a social cost of 418 billion euros. So that's really a lot, and that's really something that we should consider. And if you value it and measure it like this, it really becomes visible and measurable. So then, when we have all these different values and we have them all denoted in euro values, we can compare these scenarios of having an intervention or different alternatives of an intervention to the case in which we would do nothing. So the baseline, the situation that we are in now. And this is really what a social cost benefit is doing. It's comparing the baseline or the business as usual situation to a situation where the intervention would be implemented. Of course, there are some drawbacks to social cost benefit analysis, and we should really consider those when performing one. When you are aware of them, you can also consider them and address them as good as possible. So the quality of the social cost benefit really depends on the inputs. So the data and the models that you use. It's a garbage in, garbage out principle. So the assumptions and the data that you put into it should be good for it to be a good analysis. Then there might be some ethical problems, because you like valuing things such as human life. For example, due to a car accident, we have a deadly accident and somebody dies. In a social cost benefit analysis, we value that in terms of euros or monetary terms. And sometimes this might not seem ethically. I mean, how can you put a euro value on saving someone's life? Then there's other effects that cannot be quantified at all. So they should be considered in the social cost benefit analysis, but they cannot be measured in euro values. So they can only be considered qualitatively. An example would be the traveling comfort or the feeling of safety. For example, when you walk in a very dark alley and you don't feel safe, this has a value when, for example, a street light is built in this alley, and you would already feel a lot safer. But it's hard to measure how much safer you feel when the light is there, the street light. Then there's a trade-off, because in the communication of the social cost benefit analysis, because it can become quite technical, and to communicate it, you want to be clear and transparent about what you did, and you also want to be objective and neutral. but to communicate it in a proper way and to make it accessible, sometimes you have to leave out some of the technical details. So for communication purposes, it might sometimes be a bit too technical. And then a fifth point I have on the drawbacks of social cost benefit analysis is the social optimum. We try to calculate the social optimum using the social cost benefit analysis, but there might be other things that the politics might find more important. So the social optimum, the optimum alternative according to the social cost benefit analysis might not be the most wanted solution because, for example, politics attaches a higher value to preserving nature, and in the social cost benefit analysis, this is valued less than, for example, the savings of travel time building a new road in a nature environment. And then, so when we know all of this, how can we use this social cost benefit analysis? So we can really use it to evaluate different decisions and different investments and choose the best among different alternatives. We can also optimize the investment that we plan to make by identifying areas where the highest benefits are can be achieved. And we also can get a sense of the uncertainties in the project. So where are the highest risks? So that's for the evaluation. We can also really use it for the communication, because if we can identify who benefits most from the project, you can also use it to find support for the project from these different stakeholders. And you can also make sure that tax money is spent well, and you can communicate it to the political decision makers and also to the inhabitants that this is really the best use of the tax money that is used to invest in it. Okay, so now I'd like to have a brief recap of the most important messages that I gave. So in a social cost benefit analysis, we really look at the social impact of different human actions, and we try to express them in economic terms or economic value. And then we use them to evaluate different decisions and also communicate them. But really we should consider it's not only about the calculations that we do, but it's also really about the way of thinking of a project and an investment.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for that. Really, really fascinating. And I'm so sorry that we had some issues with the presentation there, because it was also a really beautiful one. But I'll be sure that when I send the recording around to everyone, I also include that presentation.
Yeah, thank you.
So my apologies again. But really, really fascinating stuff. I invite everyone to go ahead and if they have a question, just toss it into the chat box there and we'll read it out. Maybe to begin with, Lilian, I could just ask you a question while people are thinking and writing what they want to ask.
Yeah.
So it's very interesting, quite complicated, but also you made it quite clear. I suppose a question for me would be, when people see this social cost benefit analysis and they see everything framed in terms of financial savings and losses, is there a bit of a confusion there? I mean, when you think about how much you're saving through the social cost benefit analysis, it's not actually, for example, in the case of quality of life, it's not actually money that you would lose if you didn't follow this course of action, right? So the difference from the baseline scenario, translating it or thinking of it from this financial point of view that it's presented in, it seems to me somehow there's an easy confusion that could occur there, that actually this intervention is going to be create 600 billion worth of value, but unfortunately that won't materialize, right?
Yeah, so I totally understand. It doesn't materialize in terms of money, but it materializes in all kinds of other impacts, but those other impacts that would otherwise not be visible. They are still really important to consider, and by measuring them in money terms, they become visible and they can be compared to each other. So, for example, when you build a cycling lane, and you have to invest the money in that, but the benefits they are never visible in terms of monetary values to the politics, but or to the politicians. But there really are important social benefits, and if we only think about the money that we would earn from it, then really important investments would never be made.
Okay, good. Really interesting point. Yeah. So when it comes to thinking about it translating directly into savings or something, it would make less sense. But when you're thinking about comparing different investment options, that's when it's really going to kick in as something that's really helpful.
Yeah.
So I'm inviting everyone, and we've got a question here from Carlos, who thanks you for the presentation. And he's asking, how do you deal with the perception by the public that the benefits are exaggerated? And I think you mentioned this earlier as well about the issue of ideology slipping in the corners. So he says here, for example, if the cost-benefit analysis is expressing 700% return on investment, this is an issue that he's faced in Helsinki, where people have been a little bit skeptical of the results of cost-benefit analysis.
Yeah, and I can see that 7 times is or 700% return on investment is really high, obviously. I think when communicating it to the public, you should be really transparent and clear about how you did it, and how it should be implemented, what assumptions you made to get to this 700%. And also include the different stakeholders that are involved already during the process of making the social cost benefit analysis. So don't present the results just out of the blue and say this is the result that we have, but really include them in the thinking process when making the social cost benefit analysis. That's one of the points I had when having one of the drawbacks. It's more about the thinking than about the calculations itself.
Okay, really interesting. So the key there is making the process transparent, as you mentioned, and that
exactly.
If it seems unbelievable, well, you can say, well, we value X at this number, and we value Y at this number, and when we multiply Y and X, well, you can see for yourself if you think
exactly. Yeah, and so but then maybe the assumption was not appropriate, and then you can have a discussion. Okay, so. We think this number of cyclists will start using the cycling lane, but maybe they are a bit skeptical about that, and then you can have a discussion on what you put into the social cost benefit analysis.
Mm-hmm. Okay, brilliant. There's tons more questions that I'd like to ask, and I'm sure other people would too. And I see another one in here that we will get to later. But for now, thank you very, very much, Lilian. And I think we got to move on to Riccardo Enei from ISINNOVA, who's a project partner in Transurban EU China, and he's going to present some of the insights that we've developed. So thanks again, Lilian, and we'll chat to you a little bit later on.
Yeah, thank you.
Yes. Ricardo, are you there? Can you hear us?
Yeah,
are you
yes,
able to
Anthony.
speak? You are fantastic.
Yeah,
and are you able to share your screen, Ricardo?
Try.
I think it's now possible.
Let me try.
Fantastic.
It should be possible.
Yes, it's possible for me now. Anyway, I see this. So
okay, good.
For Riccardo,
can you see this? Lilian's presentation. I tried to share it on the screen, but maybe you have not seen it.
No, we saw it towards the end there, Bernard. We did see it, and I'll send it out to everyone when we send out the webinar.
Sorry for that.
Can you see the screen now?
We're all figuring out this terrain, I think. Great, we see it, Riccardo. Thank you.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so and I am going to show you in 5 minutes. That was the time plan of my short presentation, and in 5 minutes, I'm going to show you what we are doing in Trans-Urban EU-China in terms of cross-fertilization between EU and China concerning techniques and contribution of the social cost benefit analysis to the management and the urbanization planning and governance. And the approach, as you can see in this screen, in this slide, is quite simple in the sense that in Trans-Urban EU-China, the first step we have undertaken is to review the application fields of social cost benefit analysis in OECD and EU countries. The next step has been to find out, starting from this knowledge base, what should be the potential application field for having a better knowledge transfer between China and the OECD on EU countries. And then finally, I cap with a small example of how this potential contribution may be better exploited when I talk about the congestion cost assessment in the EU and China. Concerning the review of application fields, I have to say that, as you may imagine, the knowledge base of social cost benefit analysis in urban planning is quite huge. It is a very broad field of heterogenic contribution, and therefore the analysis of having a systematic view of all this very broad knowledge base has not been easy. But anyway, in this table, you see the results of our work. On the left side of this table, you can see 5 key research streams of social cost benefit analysis applied to urbanization. And on the right side of the table, I have tried to emphasize, to stress in a few keywords, what are the potential for transferability in the Chinese experience for each research stream. Starting from the first research stream, it is the research stream of externalities for transportation activities. You know that transportation activities represent maybe the backbone of urbanization. And in EU and OECD experience, there has been a lot of analysis, technique, guidelines on the assessment of externalities from transportation. And therefore, I see that this stream of research, given that we have a good evidence, guideline, wide range of impact, methods of transferability are available, and therefore it is an important research stream in terms of transferability. The second one is the externality for built environment. You know that when we talk about urbanization, usually we are going to think in terms of compact cities against sprawled cities. This means that the urban form, the built environment, is important in terms of impact on quality of life and citizen. I think that this research stream, there is a partial overlapping with the externality for transportation, but there are a good United States evidence available in this stream. The other stream is the loss of ecosystem services and biodiversity. I am dealing here with the land take. You know that when we, during urbanization process, we are using land. there are a lot of ecosystem services and biodiversity that sometimes are not properly valued or taken into consideration. For this SINMO research, there are growing evidence of studies, in particular from the academic side, but I have to say that given that the values of ecosystem services may be strongly site-specific, transferability to different contexts may be quite difficult. The fourth research stream is the management of public services and infrastructures. There are a lot of studies showing that, for example, management of utilities, just like water supply or electricity or telecommunication, may be strongly influenced by urban forms. This is an overlapping here with the second research stream. There are evidence available, and also I think a good transferability may be possible for these studies. The last but not least research stream is the analysis of the impacts on quality of life, health and cultural values when we are going to undertake in urbanization processes. Again, for this kind of research, they are strongly site-specific and the transferability is quite low. Okay, having said that, just we're looking at the potential for transferability. You see that we have identified 3 out of 5 research streams that are potential interesting in terms of transferability. They are the externality for transportation, the externalities from the management of public services and infrastructure, and the externality for built environment. You can see that every time I have evidence, guidelines, and method for transferability, obviously the work of cross-fertilization with the other experience is obviously more easy than when I have strong site-specific evidence, like in the case of ecosystem or cultural values. And then we jump to a practical example that I hope can show you the potential for transferability. We are looking now to the assessment of congestion cost in EU and China. Congestion cost, as I'm sure you know, it's probably one of the most I will not say important, because obviously air pollution or noise or accident are equally important, but in terms of order or magnitude of resources, I remember, for example, that when I started to work on congestion cost, some estimates that talked about 2% of EU GDP is lost in congestion cost. So congestion cost is important. And in the urban Trans-Urban EU-China, we have looking at 2 examples of assessment of congestion costs. One in the city of Rome, and the other one is in the city of Beijing. Obviously, we are using here the contribution from Chinese, important Chinese academic and experts. And so we have going to compare these 2 approaches in terms of congestion costs, and we look what happened. In this table, I try to summarize the 2 approaches. On the first row of the table, we have the approach, the formula for the assessment in Rome and Beijing. And if you look very briefly at the formula, you can see that there is basically a common approach, because congestion cost is basically made of 2 key components: the assessment of travel time, how much time I lost in congestion, and then the assessment on how monetary values can be attached to this travel time. And if you look at the 2 approaches, we have 2 equations in which the 2 main components are identified, and there is no big difference. But when I look at each component in specific, I see that concerning the quantification of time spent in congestion costs, the 2 approaches are similar. I have a national survey in Rome and a local survey in Beijing, but basically the approach is the same. But when I look at the monetization of time, I see that in the Rome, which applied the European guidelines, the assessment of the monetization time is a little bit more precise, more refined. For example, we look at the differentiation between passenger and freight. On the other hand, if I look at the Chinese approach, there is apparently a not so disaggregate analysis. And we have just a per capita hourly GDP unit that is used for the assessment. When I talk with the Professor Kai Jianming of the CIS in China, he told me that they are very interesting in the methodology and approach for a better or a more precise assessment of monetization time. I think that this brief example is maybe useful for introducing about the potential of transferability between the two big families, let's say, of social cost benefit analysis techniques, the European EU and the Chinese. That's all.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Riccardo. Really interesting and a lot of information, but again, clearly and concisely put. So I welcome everyone to go ahead and share any questions for Riccardo in the chat box. And indeed, I see one has just arrived. So I'll ask you, how do you determine the value to give to time, health impact, and other relevant parameters? So that's a big question, but maybe you could choose one of those and give us a quick example of how one goes about deciding which is the correct value to assign to something like that.
Let me stress one issue that may be interesting for our attendees. The European experience in the assessment of external costs, I will say that it's quite advanced. Because ISINNOVA, my institute, was in the past years one of the institutes working for the European Commission and contributing to the elaboration on guidelines. So I can send by email to the interested people, you have just to contact me, the guidelines which try to take stock of 20 or 30 years of assessment of external costs. And you can see that for each key categories of externality from transport, from accident to noise to air pollution to congestion, we are able to identify methodologies, reference values. Obviously, we are talking about a scientific matter which is continuously evolving, and we cannot say the final word on that. But just to answer to the question of the attendee, I think that if you are interested in it, I can send you the guidelines, and you will see that we tried to come up with a sort of a reference and standard approach for the assessment of time and all the other components of externalities.
Brilliant. And maybe if we can arrange it, we could even send out those guidelines along with the recording of the webinar. I think that would be something that would be a great resource for everyone who's been drawn here. Okay, we're low on time, but let me just quickly ask you one more question, and people are welcome to keep on putting questions in the chat as well. It's related to the previous question, and I suppose all these questions will be related in a way, because I think that the mystery of, or the difficulty in social cost benefit, I think manifests around the same kind of parameters for everyone. So when it comes to, you mentioned that the European approach is a little bit more accurate. It's taking into account more areas in this specific example. In any case, I suppose the question that presents itself to me is, how does one go about deciding when to stop? Because it's like measuring the coastline, right? The more you zoom in, the longer the coastline becomes. So it's an impossible figure. How do you decide what is the proper amount of refinement for your data? When to stop, in other words, what could in theory be an endless process?
Yeah, it's difficult to say if the European knowledge base is developed enough for saying that, okay, this is a finished point. It's very difficult, but I think that according to my knowledge and to my partial knowledge, obviously, I think that the way in which we are now going to monetization of time spent in congestion in Europe is quite refined, because thanks to the new technologies that I'm sure in China they not needed to be taught about that, but we are able now to track vehicle types, time spent in big congested cities, and we are also a good statistical background, basic data in terms of cost of labor, by type of labor, by type of freight, etc., etc. So I think that for congestion cost, we are reaching a good level of understanding. And if you look at the deliverable in Transurban EU China, in which we try to compare the final figures, you will see that surprisingly, there is not a big gap. So it means that despite the complexity and the highly site-specific context of each evaluation, if we look at comparing the final figures, the gap is not so wide. I think this is probably the most important indicator that the scientific knowledge on this matter is quite advanced.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you. So there's more questions coming in for you, and one of them is about whether this is ever applied retrospectively or if that tends to happen. But yeah, before we get to that and other questions for the other speakers, I'll thank you again and introduce Paul van Roosmalen from Rotterdam, who's going to talk about that city's experience with cost-benefit analysis in the context of urban roofs. So Paul, can you hear me? Are you there?
I can hear you very well.
Fantastic.
Can you hear me as well, apparently?
Yes, perfectly.
Good. Thank you for having me, guys. And I will try to share my screen as well to share my Rotterdam story with you. Let's
Fantastic.
See. If all's good, then...
Great.
This is best. If all's good, you see my green and white screen. Is that correct?
Yes, we see it.
Okay. I work for the city of Rotterdam, the second city in the Netherlands when it comes to inhabitants. And we've been working for the last few years on a project in the LIFE scheme of the European Union. And the project's called LIFE at Urbanroofs, for which we made a social cost benefit analysis. And I'm going to take you into depth on Rotterdam a bit and why we use it. First, I want to start with our city. This is a map of our city in two parts. The top left corner is actually to the left. It doesn't fit on one page. And what you see in green is flat roofs. All the green dots are flat roofs, and they altogether there are over 18 square kilometers of flat roofs in this small city. And bear in mind that Rotterdam has only, I would say, 650,000 inhabitants. It's on the world scale, it's not a big city. Still, we have more than 18 square kilometers of flat roofs, and the red dots are inclined roofs. That's roofs that we can also use, but not as easily. And why is that? Well, in Rotterdam, we are part of the network of resilient cities. And I think that resilience is a word that is very well connected to Rotterdam. Rotterdam was basically bombed flat in the Second World War, rebuilt afterwards, which led to modern buildings, but also a lot of flat roofs because of that. The post-war construction techniques were with concrete, with steel. And they made it possible to make bigger flat roofs. So we have a lot of potential of space in the city. And if you zoom into the city center here in blue, everything in blue is flat. It's more than 1 million square meters of flat roof in the city center alone. So there's a huge potential of space in the city, above the city actually. And what we said is like, we want to use those roofs. And this is a color scheme of functions that we came up with, things that we want to do with the roofs. I think most of you have heard of green roofs, a very good addition to the cities when it comes to absorbing rainwater. Hey, don't do that. We went from there and we said, well, blue roofs, they will store your water. Yellow roofs provide a city with sustainable energy, with solar panels or small-scale windmills. Red roofs for us is places where people will stay, where they can recreate. I think it's something that you see now very, very strongly in a lot of cities around the world. With the COVID-19, rooftops become places where people can get out of their houses meet the neighbors, although they're on the other side of the street, but it's places for social cohesion. We never thought of this function before this whole crisis, but it happens so that we're using it already like that in a lot of places around the world. And then the newer functions for us is things like orange mobility. And we really believe that in the future, rooftops will be more and more connected physically by bridges, but maybe also that's why we have this icon as a landing space for drones. Like if flying taxis and delivery by drones will come off, the rooftops in the city will be a very logical place for them to land. And then purple roofs for living. We see now that more and more people, young people, want to live in tiny houses. They don't want to have this big mortgage, but they want to be in the center of the city. So a small building on top of a building or a cluster of them in a small village is something that a lot of people like. And living on top of a roof is something that is really starting to come off in Rotterdam. And of course, in gray, there's a lot of technical installations on rooftops already. Think of chimneys, but also new ones coming. Think of 5G antennas for the new mobile networks. There will be more of them. The network will be denser, and they all claim for space. So a lot of things can happen on the roof. There's a huge potential. And we say, okay, we should try to find golden combinations. If you combine them, if you add functions on the same place, then you're really making a difference. And it can look in many different ways. These are just some examples of how that could look. And we call it multifunctional rooftops, places where you have multiple functions that in that sense, like make better use of the space available in the city. So let's not expand cities, as was said just before, but let's densify them. And that could look something like this. This is our vision. Well, that's what we want to do in Rotterdam with rooftops. And we started in 2017 with a social cost benefit analysis in the LIFE Urbanroofs project. Well, the urban roofs part, I think I explained. And what we did is that we said, okay, we want to get especially a lot of investments in climate adaptation and mitigation as well. But the economical benefits of that is very, very hard to describe. And if you can describe it, it's very hard to get a return on investment. So if you look on a green roof, it's a very good investment for climate action, as climate action. But if I invest as a building owner, well, I cannot raise the rent because of the green roof that easily. So the economic structure is not always working. So the first step that we needed to take is to make this social cost benefit analysis on the level of a building to show building owners what's the value of their investments. And a lot of those values, if you look at the colors that I just described, are social values. They are not always economic values or not very specific ones. It's not very easy to determine them. So what we did is that we worked together with Arcadis, a Dutch consultancy firm, and CE Delft, a second firm from Rotterdam, from Delft, near to Rotterdam, and they helped us to provide this to build this tool. So what it basically does, it shifts from public to private. I work for the municipality, but we do not own those buildings. We do not own those rooftops, but we still want a public investment made there, something that everybody benefits from. And we made it on the scale of a building owner. Most of the social cost benefit analyses that I've seen are on a district level, on a city level, on a country level, which is very good, but it does not give action perspective to the building owner. And we think that building owners are very important stakeholders in the city to get change implemented. I mean, it doesn't help me as a building owner if we say that 50% of an area should have this or that function. I mean, what can I do? They can do something on their own building. So we narrowed it down to the building level. And this tool helps them to see what kind of options they have and also to come up with an optimum, like what investments would have the best in the end analysis when it comes to both economic effects and social effects. And what you see here in the graph is just an example of one of the studies we did. We did a number of them. You see all the organizations that we worked with in the orange field. First, they get an economic comparison of the cost. I don't know if you can see that with my arrow, but this is the cost and the benefits. Economically, you would have a negative saldo. It would not work out when you just look at it in an economic way. And then besides that, we introduce all the social benefits that those that investment would have. And it comes to things like water retention, biodiversity, social cohesion, but also some things like pride or prestige or public relations values. They're all things that are very hard to look at from an economic point of view, but are very valuable in a qualitative analysis. We made this tool in a simple Excel form, and it's open source, so everybody can use it. And you can even adjust the parameters. So we came up with those two companies for a value for a tree, for example. But if in your situation the value should be different, you can adjust the value and calculate it again. And it might end up to have a different optimum. Same goes for different types of owners. For social, one of the organizations is an NGO. They have completely different set of values than the private investor who is far more money driven. So we made it for a couple of different types of owners, so they can all look for their own values and how to find an optimum for that. We made 5 of them, and in the scheme of the LIFE Urbanroofs project, and there's 5 others offered to other projects in the city, because the tool can be basically used with by everybody. And this is one of the projects that you see that is in the project, in the LIFE project. It's a street that's becoming climate adaptive with the help of the building owners and their investments on their rooftops, but also in other parts of their buildings. Towards a goal, this is what we want to achieve for them. I mean, it all comes, in the end, it only works when the next generations will find our cities as inhabitable and pleasant, and all the things that were also said at the beginning of this meeting. That's what we're striving for. And this is just a small tool that we use to make that happen. Well, this is for you guys, a lot of links for more information. I'll send it to Anthony to you, so you can go get more in-depth knowledge. You can of course also find there the tools and the reports that we made for your usage, of course.
Brilliant, Paul. Thank you. That's really, really fascinating to see that application, and I love, because so many of our earlier questions were about well, how do you objectively measure these inputs? And of course, one can't objectively measure them, but you can do your best to justify things. But the idea that different stakeholders can implement their own values on these things, and then you can compare, well, what are the social costs and benefits for different groups within society? I think that's a really fascinating part of your tool. We have one question already coming in from Nasha, my colleague at Eurocities. So she's saying, great, really interesting. And how's your tool going at the moment? So you said you gave it to 5 projects. Can you tell us a bit about what the uptake on the tool has been and the feedback thus far?
Yeah, we used the tool to get those projects started, and all but one are now in already. The last one is being built at the moment. So we're getting multifunctional roofs in the city within this LIFE Urbanroofs project. What we also did is an evaluation with those the people, with the building owners, like how did you like the tool and what could be improved. And with their feedback, it mostly was like we missed some of the values that we see, but were not in the tool. That was one. And the second thing, they said, like, okay, the 1.0 version was quite a lot of work to fill in. You need to have a lot of parameters, and it takes time and some knowledge to do that. So at this moment, we're working on the second version. Working on that, we're expanding the values, and we're making it more user-friendly by presetting a lot of parameters. Like for most situations, this will be the most accurate guess, you could say. You could, of course, adjust it if you want, but if you want to do it quick and simple, then we put it at, let's say, some standard default. And that is what we're building now with an interface that is more user-friendly. So now people have to use the Excel and work in there. In the second version, we'll have an interface where people will be helped along, guided along to fill it out.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Great, interesting. And there's another question here about, for you, Paul, about including project finance in the tool, the time value of the money. So he's saying that, Carlos is saying that many projects are financed, and when we talk about the buildings or infrastructure and the clients, and the client is not the city, it becomes a little bit more confusing.
Yeah, so in this case, the client is not the city, it's the building owner itself, so to say, and that could be a social housing corporation, a private investor, or an NGO, for example. That's organizations we work for or with. What we did is that we looked at the life cycle of the investment. So if you put a solar panel, for example, it has a life expectancy of 25 years. Then you take that investment over 25 years with interest and all that stuff, and you make it, I don't know the exact English phrase for that, but there's economic calculation ways to make it like current value. Mm-hmm. So you look at the expected value in the future, and then you translate it to what that would be worth at this moment. Mm-hmm. And that's the base for the analysis.
Okay.
I hope, Carlos, that answers your question.
Yes, Carlos, it's very satisfied. Super. And maybe I'll just ask one more question for you. We're going to finish up very shortly in a couple of minutes, but we had a question from Nun in Thailand who was asking about the qualitative, going from quality to quantity. And I think maybe it's particularly interesting. I mean, it's something that everyone had to touch on, of course, but it's particularly interesting. You mentioned, for example, metrics like pride and a lot of other similarly nebulous ones. I wonder if you could give us an example, and I know people will be able to set their own values for that, but can you give us an example of one of these metrics and kind of how you decided or how you thought about the process of costing it?
Yeah, that's very tricky because that depends a lot on how organizations look at it themselves. So I think it is connected to the story that was told by Lilian. Like, you propose a value and we benchmark it on as much research as possible. And for example, the value of a tree in the Netherlands is pretty much clear how much value macroeconomically that should get. When it comes to pride or PR value, it's completely different for each company. So you make an assumption and that's what you work with. And if you later on decide that this value is not correct, it's too high or too low either, you can adjust it. And it might affect your tool. And for example, we had that with biodiversity, just in all openness. In the first version of the tool, looking at biodiversity was awarded with, I think it was 10 euros per year for 1 square meter of green. And if you make a 5,000 square meter rooftop green, it's a tremendous amount of money over 25 years. So we put that value too high, apparently. So now we can adjust it again, and it's a bit of trial and error. Of course, you base as much on research as possible, but sometimes you have to make a little bit wilder guess because you just simply do not have the background information available.
Okay, brilliant. And of course, that's the way that science and indeed our cities should proceed. Okay, thank you so much, Paul. I'm just going to put one or two questions back to the other speakers before we close up in about 5 minutes. So Lilian, maybe there's a question that came in here which I think will be interesting if you can provide an answer to or a take on. It was about retrospective use of cost-benefit analysis, and it's something that maybe Paul just briefly touched on. So the question is whether it's ever useful to apply this tool to projects that have already occurred versus projects that you're planning, and if the kind of results that you can expect from that would be different. Have you got any thoughts on that, Lilian? Are you still with us?
Yeah, I'm still here, and actually, we have been discussing this in my company as well with some colleagues, because we usually do it ex ante. So before the investment is made, we want to try to see what's the most optimal option, but you can also do it ex post. And this would still be interesting to see if the investment was actually a good investment, but you can also learn a lot from it by doing it ex post. As you can learn about the assumptions that can be made also for the future use of social cost benefit analysis. So you can, by looking at the different impacts and how they have resulted after the investment was made, you can really learn from for the future as well.
I'm mute. Brilliant. So there is a kind of a different kind of value in both, and it's definitely a good idea to at least have an eye retrospective to the formula that you have used or not. There's another question, Lilian, that I think should go to you and the other two speakers as well, and that's about the availability of the tool that you're using. I see Paul has already said that his tool is available online, and he's going to share a link, which I can certainly also include in the email to all participants. Lilian, the tool that you use, it's open, it's available, or how does it work for people to access that?
For us, no, it's not available publicly. It's because it really depends on the project, and we also always make a new model for each project, because it really depends, and it also really matters what you put in the tool. So we have we are trying to make a more standard tool now, but it's you can put anything into it. Like I said before, it's like a garbage in, garbage out. So you should really consider what you put in the model, and to avoid people from misusing the tool, we like to keep it private.
Good. So you're monitoring its use and making sure that that it's not just a matter of execution. It's really also a matter of thinking carefully and scientifically as well as pragmatically about the metrics that you're putting in there. I like that garbage in, garbage out. Yeah, I wish that it weren't so, but okay, brilliant. And going back then to Riccardo from ISINNOVA from Transurban China. Riccardo, I wonder if you'd address that, because you've been looking at so much research in relation to social cost benefit analysis, and in some areas there's a lot of evidence and in others less. But I'd like to know finally, is there, where there's a lot of evidence, is there also concordance? I mean, does it seem like people are honing in on the same kind of scientific consensus and metrics, etc., or are there really pretty diverse ways still of understanding the relevant concepts?
Yeah, obviously it depends basically on the field, the application field that we are talking about. In terms of externality from transportation activity, as I told you before, I think that we are reaching progressively a good agreement in the community, scientific community. Concerning, for example, biodiversity or cultural evaluation, as maybe somebody also said, the issues obviously are more tricky. And if you look at the meta-analysis trying to put together all the available evidences, you look at the broad variations and the different approaches. So I think that there is still a lot of research to do in this field. So it is a mixed picture, as you say. So depends on the application field we are looking at.
Okay, interesting. But a picture that's getting clearer and clearer, and hopefully that this hour has been useful for people to clarify the picture a little bit for themselves, and all of these materials that our speakers have promised will I'm sure, lend to that considerably. So thank you so much to our presenters, and also to everyone who's come and asked questions, or those who just sat in and listened. Really great to have you all here. I will be sending out a recording of this event shortly, and remember, of course, you can always ask to have your contribution removed from that recording if you so wish. Yes, thank you all again. Great start to the morning, and hopefully a good way to continue the week. So all the best.
Goodbye. Thank you. Goodbye to everybody.
Goodbye, everybody.
Thank you. Goodbye.